Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 27th, 2017. Made it to the end of yet another week, although, as we know, the News Week, that would be a great name for either a band or a news weekly magazine. Newsweek, someone should look into that. The end of the News Week no longer happens on Friday. Of course, the president often tweets angrily into Friday afternoon, occasionally fires a few off before heading out for a round of golf on Saturday. Going to be about 70 degrees on Saturday at his current favorite golf spot. He's not yet ready to fly back down to Mar-a-Lago for winter golf, but I guess that'll happen soon. This will probably be the last 70-degree day, and although you can golf well into the 60s, I don't know how he does with that. I think he likes to be kept at room temperature or thereabouts, since pretty soon he'll be spending 4 or 5 times as much to play golf each weekend, flying down to Mar-a-Lago and living in the no security, no transparency zone of Mar-a-Lago, where lobbyists and foreign nationals come and go at will, so long as they are able to pay the $200,000 initiation fee. They can hang out and listen to state secrets and or trade in them with no possible consequences. That should be fantastic. So things will only accelerate, and I guess we ought to get ready for that season. Daily Co's Radio is, of course, live, as Bill reminds us, from Portland, Maine, where he is currently not molesting any actresses in Kennebunkport or the immediate environs. Daily Co's Radio is live. Kagro X, that's me. Hi, everybody. David Waldman, you may know me as, reveals Trump's new opioid plan. Deport all the opioid abusers, of course, and why not? That sounds like the good plan right now. It stands at a glorified just say no. And yesterday's address, I didn't pay any attention to it whatsoever. You shouldn't either. He, dragged a bunch of people to whatever room of the White House in order to say, Dad nabbit, we're absolutely going to do something. But none of the initiatives that he even hinted at and didn't really describe in any fashion worth mentioning are funded anyway, and they aren't going to be, so forget about it, largely. I did see an interesting tweet let's see if I can figure out where this one came from. But I guess it was a Twitter account, a parody Twitter account, that I guess was supposed to be sort of a humorous idea of Chinese President Xi's private thoughts, I guess. And I wonder if I could find this tweet, but it was a very funny idea, which was basically apparently a part of the address was, here it is, Xi Jinping thought. Now that's the name of the account, and the actual address of the account, the is at relevant organs. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but we'll just take it at face value. And I thought this was an interesting observation. I guess part of the press conference, whatever, press availability, was Trump saying that, the real problem with opioids, I guess, is, first of all, he said, it's the people taking them. Everybody stop. If everybody just would stop taking the opioids, we would have less than half of the opioid problems that we have today. The other problem, of course, is that they are being manufactured and imported cheaply, allegedly, from China. And so he was, I guess, I didn't pay any attention to it. I only saw this tweet. He's calling on the Chinese to crack down on this. Somebody else do something about this terrible problem we're having. Brilliant plan by the Chinese, if that's what's going on, knocking off opioids and selling them cheaply, dumping them in the United States, and destroying us from the inside out. Those wily Chinese, I guess. Is that wrong? I don't know. I don't know whether that's what they're up to. I don't care. Doesn't make a difference. There are better ways to address the problem, but I thought this was an interesting tweet. The Xi Jinping thought here When we asked Westerners to stop opioid imports into China, they sank our Navy and stole Hong Kong. But sure, we'll look into it. We only started, well, it wasn't us per se, but the West only, conducted an actual opium war against the Chinese. Like, we will kill you unless you allow us to continue profiteering off opioids. But okay, maybe they're not opioids because it was opium. Yeah, sure. That's a distinction that we can lean on. Why not? All right. Well, we'll save that one and let it hang around for our afternoon roundup that Scott Anderson always helps us put together. And update also on the entire future of the show. Where's my echo? I need to turn that back on. Monday. Ordinarily, when we expect to have Greg Dworkin back with us, but events getting in the way once again. More horrible, noisy demolition work going on at the Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. I wish we were demolishing the Trump presidency, but we're not. We're taking up more tile, and it's going to be loud. And I think we may have to go with a pre-recorded Monday. I'm going to see what we can do about putting that together, and there's going to be some extensive work going on. There's going to be like a 2-week project going on. I don't think it's going to be noisy every day, but I might be down in the basement at this point. They're working everywhere, and there's going to be work at even my alternative locations where I try to relocate to get away from the noise are going to be noisy this time. We're working on it. Renovating it, trying to make it noisier. So because, bigger and better, always the direction we're headed in this great country of ours. Many things to catch up on. I did not pay attention for the most part to the morning's presidential anger tweeting. I think he was just yelling at the television and repeating what was being said on Fox and Friends. I did catch wind of the fact that, and I would not be surprised if the president himself cast much of that wind, but I did catch wind of the idea that he had seen an advertisement on Fox that morning. I did happen to see that somebody captured this side-by-side news, a tweet from Gabriel De Benedetti. Wow, what a name to have to start the morning with. Tweeting that tomorrow morning, this would have been yesterday, tomorrow morning might be interesting, or maybe that was yesterday or the day before, talking about yesterday being tomorrow morning, because I see it's dated October 25th. Today's the 27th. Tomorrow morning might be interesting. I'm told Tom Steyer's ad on impeaching Trump is going to play on Fox and Friends for the first time. I guess they thought that would be funny because Trump would see it. And sure enough, on October 27th, that's today, at 6:58 a.m., the president was up and angry. Wacky and totally unhinged Tom Steyer, who has been fighting me and my Make America Great Again agenda from the beginning, never wins elections. All right, well, sure, whatever, I guess. I'm glad that they unsettled the man first thing in the morning. That's as good as you can hope for, really. Let's see. We'll gather up some of the morning's comments, some of the morning's news, try and catch up on what we missed, a little bit of it in the past couple of days. And I think we're largely safe from, well, it's early in the morning yet. I think we're done for the day with bombshell revelations of sexual harassment by big names in any particular industry. But I mean, it could happen anytime because there's hundreds of them out there. And I guess you're never safe. Well, you're never safe from them, so I don't see why we shouldn't be safe from their disclosures as well. Let's see. Josh Warren has been sharing a couple of things with me this morning, including what he says is a great story on Trump's opioid policy. I'll believe it. Well, I'll believe it when I see it, but I see it. It's right here. So I believe it now. Mother Jones has the story, and you can't go wrong by putting Mother in the title of your magazine, as far as I'm concerned. Trump just screwed the millions of Americans addicted to opioids. That sounds about right. Let's take a look, because I said opioids earlier in the show, and now it's a theme. Let's all take some opioids and just listen in on the news. Trump just screwed the millions of Americans addicted to opioids. but when you're a star, they let you do it. That was his comment. He made big promises, but a public health emergency, quote unquote, public health emergency, won't solve the problem, experts say. By the way, can you do that? Can you say, well, quote unquote, something, something, something? Because if you've unquoted, then the next thing you say is outside the quotes, right? Are we doing that wrong? Shouldn't you say, as many people do, quote, public health emergency, unquote? That is very, it doesn't roll trippingly, let's say. Anyway, Kate Harlow, Harloe, is the writer on this one, dated yesterday. Mother Jones' piece on Thursday. That was yesterday. President Trump declared the nation's opioid epidemic a public health emergency. And here we have, quote, we can be the generation that ends the opioid epidemic, comma, unquote. He said, period. I'm going to be Victor Borgia. How old am I? Wow. We can do it. And that we can do it, that was enclosed in quotes too. Forget it. You get the idea. The announcement came more than 2 months after the president first promised to declare a national emergency and instead became one, which is distinct from a public health emergency. What is this? He said public health emergency. All right. A national emergency is distinct from a public health emergency. Yeah, it's different words. The declaration permits, this is interesting, permits the federal government to engage in activities such as assisting state and local governments, that sounds like a good one, suspending or modifying certain legal requirements, and expending available funds to address the emergency. That's logical. I would assume that all of those things would happen in a public health emergency. Public health emergencies last 90 days. I guess somebody wrote that down somewhere. Though they can be renewed, which of course means they can last more than 90 days. But okay, every 90 days you have to renew a public health emergency because reason. The White House statement on the public health emergency declaration outlined several strategies, including expanding access to telemedicine services to address drug use and shifting resources within certain public health programs to expedite addiction recovery. All right. But many public health experts say, and this is not a quote, the White House's plan amounts to too little too late. This part is a quote. It's a complete failure of leadership, said Keith Humphreys, a Stanford psychiatry professor who has also worked in drug policy positions under both the Bush and Obama administrations. Minor changes in a few programs that would barely rate an announcement by an assistant undersecretary. That might be true. I might agree with that characterization. However, there aren't any assistant undersecretaries. Trump never nominated any, so he's got to do the job himself. An exclusive report in USA Today included interviews with 4 senior officials who work on the opioids policy and spoke on a condition of anonymity. USA Today reports that today's declaration will allow the administration to, quote, tap the Public Health Emergency Fund. That's the big deal. A special fund. It is. My gosh, it's special. It's special to me, special to you. A special fund that gives HHS maximum flexibility in a health crisis. Wow. Bill Hall, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Health, there really is one, told USA Today that fund totally sucks. I've read it wrong. That fund currently totals, but it also totally sucks. You'll hear it when I tell you what the number is. That fund currently totals $57,000. That is not a lot of funds. The Public Health Emergency Fund, $57,000. $25,000 of it was just given away to the Gold Star family that Trump promised to pay, and he probably stole the money from here. It used to be $75,000. It's down to 50. No, just kidding. That didn't happen. But I mean, a government fund with $57,000 in it, that's pretty sad. That's virtually no money. Yeah, for a government, it certainly is. It says Dara Lieberman, no, I hope, relation to the ex-senator. She is Senior Government Relations Manager at Trust for America's Health and an expert on public health emergencies. So she's not kidding. She knows that $57,000 totally sucks. USA Today also reported that one administration official said there was no specific funding request that would accompany the emergency, and House and Senate Appropriations Committees said they hadn't had any discussions with the administration on it. The White House did not answer Mother Jones's questions about whether any new funding would be added. President Trump's declaration today amounts to a drop in the bucket compared to what the White House and Congress should be delivering to address this crisis, said Grant Smith, Deputy Director of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance, in a press release. We need new funding from Congress to fix our broken treatment infrastructure and boost public health capabilities to end this crisis. Today's announcement comes months after the Commission on Combating Drug Addiction, a committee convened by Trump and chaired by Governor Chris Christie, remember that guy, issued an interim report in July recommending an emergency declaration as a way to empower Trump's cabinet to take bold steps and force Congress to focus on funding and empowering the executive branch. Well, they didn't do any of that. Shortly after the commission issued its report, former Secretary of Health and Human Services Tom Price told reporters that the president was treating the crisis, quote, as an emergency, and it is an emergency, unquote. But the administration made no special, or rather official, declaration days after that at his golf club in New Jersey. Trump told the press, the opioid crisis is an emergency, and I'm saying officially right now it is an emergency. Except I'm going to wait for a couple of months and then say it's an emergency later and do nothing. But until today, roughly 11 weeks later, something like 20 rounds of golf later, seemingly nothing had been done to make the declaration official. Public health advocates and lawmakers were left waiting. That freezes the field, says Humphreys. When the president says, I'm about to do this, people wait to see what the president proposes. A lot of time is lost with people wondering what the heck he's up to. It's really unhelpful. Someone should count or estimate how many people died from opioid overdoses between the time he said, I'm going to declare it an emergency because it's such a huge emergency, and then the 11 weeks that it took him to come and say, you know what, it's an emergency. There's no money, but it's an emergency. Last Monday, when Trump went off script and again promised to make the emergency declaration official, it was to the shock of his administration and top agency officials. They are not ready for this, a public health advocate told Politico, referring to the officials at Health and Human Services who would oversee the work. Based on the testimony we heard Wednesday before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, several high-ranking HHS officials seemed to be familiar with very few details of the president's plan, because there wasn't one. Added Andrew Kessler, principal at Slingshot Solutions, a consulting firm for health policy. This might be an indication that they were taken a bit by surprise when President Trump announced that there would be an emergency declaration in a week's time. Of course, they were taken by surprise because last time he said there would be an emergency declaration in a week's time, he waited 11 weeks and then threatened it again. I would have expected another 10-week delay at the minimum. In general, public health advocates are unsure whether and to what degree declaring an emergency will help tackle the opioid crisis. The White House has to be in this for the long term. You could forget that. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what he said, and it was Kessler who said that, insisting that sustainable concrete plans are necessary. By design, a public health emergency has a foreseeable end point. 90 days, right? But for the opioid crisis, it's unclear what that point might be. Public health emergencies have, quote, never been used for something like this, unquote, said Lieberman of the opioid crisis. This crisis could go on for years. I don't want to grade them yet because the grade would be incomplete, Kessler said. But so far, he says, the House is on fire, not the House of Representatives, so that's a good idea. The House is on fire and they turned on the sprinkler system rather than the fire hydrant. Although, whatever. Okay, sprinklers better than nothing, I guess. I don't know what to say about that. Okay, well, that's where we are, and I think points out some important differences between doing things and having a press conference. And, of course, the fact that there's $57,000 in the fund. Well, I guess that would have told us all. I was going to say it tells you all you need to know, but then I feel silly for telling you so much more. But still, it was a good piece. Thanks, Josh, for forwarding that one on. Let me keep an eye on what's going on in comments here on Twitter so that I don't miss anything new. Here, Josh was saying, by the way, you can't even buy good drugs for $57,000. That's true. We can't even just go and buy up the market and keep them out of people's hands that way. Is there anything we can do with the gun thing and the opioids? We get people to shoot opioids, not intravenously, but to fire weapons at them or use them as bullets, or I don't know. And if we say that they're going to be taken off the market, people will go buy them, and that's dangerous. We don't like that. All right. Well, I don't know how else we can catch up on that thing. Okay, let's see. Yes, I did see this one. Rebecca Romans makes a couple of suggestions here, the latest of which is just basically Sebastian Gorka is still alive, it turns out. And I guess he was on the Hannity, Fox show on Hannity last night. I sound like an old man. He was on the Hannity. That's how I saw it. Matlock. He was on Hannity, which is a powerful opioid in itself, essentially calling for the execution of Hillary Clinton. That's totally normal, right? I have not heard him speak. And somebody suggested that I guess, his Hungarian background or whatever. Does he speak in accented English? Because wasn't he born in England? His parents were in exile from Hungary, and he went back and he learned to speak, presumably speak Hungarian, and tried to make a career there. But does he speak with an accent? And is it a Hungarian accent or what? I don't know. I've never heard him speak. I could listen to the audio, but who wants to do that? But really, Sebastian Gorka, Hillary Clinton should be convicted of treason like the Rosenbergs. Those people got the chair. Okay. It's a thing. A guy said it. He's a jerk and a gun failer. Don't forget about that. And let's see. There's much more. Our break is coming up in a few minutes, but Armando has generously offered to offer up some comments on the Uranium One situation, which really we ought to take a look at. I've been having lots of fun. I think it's a bad idea to bring up the Uranium One situation and try to turn a scandal out of it, because it it reminds me every time I hear uranium, anytime I hear UR anything, right? URL, as a matter of fact. I think of the P-tape. The idea that Donald Trump once hired prostitutes in Moscow to Uranium One on a mattress that he believed that the Obamas once slept on. It seems like a bizarre thing, but yeah, they're trying to warm this one over. There's been a lot of writing over it. I haven't been too exercised over this one because I'm not positive that it's going to spread beyond the wing nutosphere. Not that that's unimportant, but why don't we wait until after the break, Armando, if you're interested in coming on and commenting on that and other things, and we'll bring you in at that point. Another of Rebecca Roman's suggestions here, and I did see this one too. This is a really perfectly outrageous clause now being circulated from the Whitefish situation. The Whitefish contract apparently has been obtained. Ken Klippenstein, the writer for the Daily Beast, apparently got a hold of this thing. And there's a particular provision, in addition to wasting $300 million. There's one particular provision that has caught everybody's eye, and that is, you know what? Hang on a second. Let me run down his little tweet storm about it, because there's a lot that's bizarre about this contract, including the lots of things that are being paid for under this contract, and then the question of what can you do about it. $300 million in taxpayer money, of course, includes one Chinook helicopter airlift, apparently. For who, what, where, I don't know. But although there are remote mountainous regions that perhaps you might want to access by helicopter. Okay, $20,277 there. S-61 helicopter airlift for an even more difficult mountain, I guess, or perhaps less difficult. I don't know. This one, it costs less, so maybe it's less difficult. $15,993. And passenger helicopter, which, what were they taking on the other ones? Elephants? This is a $3,969, flight there. Okay. What else have we got here? $332.41 per person for accommodations each day. That's the per diem. They're staying in some very, very fine hotels in Puerto Rico, which I thought were all destroyed, but okay. $79.82 per person for food each day. It will be expensive, of course, to get food down there, but less expensive than that. I mean, you could do better in an airport. Anyway, Whitefish contract. That's the big thing. The incredible part here that is being circulated by everyone and has been recommended to me by Rebecca Romans and others. She's just the latest one on the scene with this Article 59. This is pretty interesting here. What do you think of this one? Article 59, there's a section 1 here, right down at the bottom, underlined in red. Thank you very much. In no event shall PREPA, and we remember who PREPA is, right? Everyone remembers where we got that name. In no event, though, shall PREPA, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the FEMA administrator, the Comptroller General of the United States, or, that sounds like an impressive array of people, or any of their authorized representatives have the right to what? Audit or review the cost and profit elements of the labor rates specified herein. So those, the amounts of money they're paying, and who knows what else is subject to this kind of protection. That is a rather amazing thing. And we could tie that to a thematic a thread that we could run through an entire show, because we do have to get to the idea of what did the Republican Congress force through the other day with respect to arbitration and big banks. Boy, they don't trust juries and the people who comprise them as far as they can throw them. We'll talk about more on our way back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. My contract, of course, states that in no event shall anyone be able to make me continue with this show if I don't feel like it. That's pretty good, but you also have to send me $1 million a day just for meals. I think that's a pretty good bargain, and looking forward to the salad days. And that's not what I'm even going to eat, but the salad days. Scott, our ship has come in. I figured out how we're going to do this thing. What we have to do is get someone to sign a contract with us. Armando has joined us. At a per diem of $40 million.
I'll sign the contract, but I don't have $1 million to pay.
That's okay. Neither does Puerto Rico. So
yes, exactly.
We can do good that. Point. So before we went to the break, there's a lot of things that came up. You mentioned, and we mentioned briefly, the Uranium One story, which, as I said, is really only, I think, has kind of really caught on among the wingnutosphere. But as always, the big danger is that with the idea in mind that they're going to be open-minded and express both sides of the story, idiots at New York Times and CNN and places like that say, well, we'll report, you decide whether or not we already told you the story 2 years ago and dismissed it as bunk, because it was. As far as I understand what's going on with the thing, they brought it back up for no particular reason. They just wanted to distract from what was going on in Trump Russia. And although I thought the clever part was that they're actually trying to use this as a way, among other things, use this as a way to say, well, what's really going on here is Hillary Clinton is and has been colluding with the Russians all along, to great effect, obviously. She's president of the United States now, as you can tell. But the first go around with this Uranium One thing, the Republicans were hoping that people would buy into the story, as I understand it, that Hillary Clinton single-handedly, or perhaps with the assistance of Barack Obama, Kenyan Muslim, approved for, well, as Trump had it, just basically handed over all of America's uranium to the Russians, which is a terrible thing because Russia is our friend, as the alt-right constantly reminds us, and that she did it by herself. And the truth of the matter is, I think it was some small percentage of uranium that was in the possession of the United States, and I think some from Canada as well, purchased on the free market and all of that by a Russian agency, and the sale required the approval of the entire United States government. Basically, there were some 9 agencies involved in all of this. Hillary Clinton didn't unilaterally rubber stamp this thing. The rest of the national security apparatus had a hand in it. And by the way, not mentioned in any of the second go-round coverage of Uranium One is that Eric Prince and friends have been actively pursuing that stupid deal that would sell like actual breeder reactors to the Saudis and put them under Saudi control, but locate them in the heart of American naval bases and cities and research centers. No problems that I can see there.
That's a story I don't know about. The Uranium One story, it's 20% of the uranium mining capacity of the United States that was implicated in the deal. The company itself has holdings in the United States, Canada, Kazakhstan. I believe the Brits also, some of their holdings. Anyway, it was a multinational situation. It was first proposed in 2009, approved by the USCIUS, which is the commission that was created after the Dubai ports deal situation back in 2007. Remember when they were selling American ports to Dubai? That became big to do.
Yes.
And that's really the genesis of all that. It's a pretty routine nothing. But I have a different political take than you in the sense of you say, well, this isn't going anywhere. I don't think it's going anywhere. And even if it goes somewhere, it would go against Hillary Clinton, who's never running for anything ever again. So what do I really care? But I do think there's actually a political opportunity here.
Wow.
All right. There's 2 things. First of all, when your point men on your scandal in Congress, you're going to scandalize something, is Devin Nunes and Charles Grassley. That's the D team, even for the Republicans.
That is true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a distraction, and you're absolutely right. But it's an opportunity. Here's what I see as the opportunity. If you see me tweet about it, sorry to bore you, I'm going to say the same thing.
I haven't. Go ahead.
If the Uranium One deal is so bad, if it's so bad to give the Russians control over 20% of the mining rights, they have no export rights. They can mine it, but they can't remove it from the United States, by the way.
Oh, really?
Just so you know. Yeah. That's one of the restrictions that the USCIUS required to approve the deal, and the uranium actually cannot leave the United States.
Interesting. Exact opposite of Keystone, by the way. We
Right.
don't even mine it. Right. It's not ours. We just ship it out.
So there really is no real threat in this deal, but there is a political opportunity. And here's how I'm framing it, and I will continue to frame it this way until I'm blue in the face, which I already am.
Okay.
It's better than orange, this is what I say. But if this is so bad, why doesn't Donald Trump expropriate the uranium? He has that power. He can issue an order tomorrow. This is a national security issue. And, we don't think Russia should have these mining rights, so we're going to take it back. Here's your money back. We're keeping our uranium. You don't have any mining rights here anymore. Boom, it's over. Why would Donald Trump do that if this is such a big national security issue?
That's a good question.
Well, what's the answer? No one asks this. Now, it's going to take a Democrat to stand up and say this. And I think I even have the framing for you. In 2010, the Russians were not the bad actors that they've proven to be in the last 7 years. And I can point to a number of things they've done, not just the election interference, the invasion of Ukraine, the Crimea, the threats, the bad acts internally, the murders. Putin has proven to be a bad man. We gave him a chance. He's failed. Therefore, we're taking the uranium deal back. Why can't a prominent Democrat stand up and say that? Doesn't have to be all of them. Just one. Get the story started.
Yeah. I don't know. It'll have to be somebody without granite countertops, but we could probably find
or someone who isn't tied to the Russians, which I assume is most of them. So it's, to me, just say, fine. Look, you started with Gorka and his treason thing. Now, I didn't click the tape because I can't stand Gorka and it makes me physically ill to hear him. But I assume it had to do with the Uranium One deal.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, what else? What else is the treason?
That's this week's
here?
Treason. Yeah.
So if it's about that, I said, wait a second. Here's the treason. Donald Trump, because of his debt to the Russians, won't undo the deal.
I can't imagine that he would.
You know, Hillary Clinton lost. She doesn't have any power. There's nothing for her to do. Donald Trump does have power. Why won't he use it? It's because the Russians own him.
Yeah, it's a good. That is a good
I'll
opportunity.
put it to you this way: if the shoe was on the other foot, that's what the Republicans would be doing.
Probably true,
and it would work. And CNN and the New York. Listen, this whole story got legs because the New York Times. And by the way, cancel your subscription to the New York Times.
Oh, dang it.
You'd have to cancel your subscription to the New York Times. It's a terrible newspaper.
I don't know what I'm going to read.
Ran a Breitbart article in the New York Times and treated it as a serious story. This Uranium One story. They said that it raises questions as to whether Hillary Clinton acted on behalf of Frank Giustra, who was the owner of the company or an owner of the company that was sold to Rosatom. And did they approve of it? Of course, she couldn't do anything. They'd have to bribe 9 foundations to have done it. So the story made no sense.
Okay, right.
But the point is, it's already made the New York Times. It's already. I've heard Wolf Blitzer talk about this story all the time. And he keeps saying Hillary Clinton sold it. And he says it that way, which is outrageous and incompetent. But you're right. It's not outside of Fox. It's not been a huge story, but it's there. It's hanging around, and they both sides these things, and they pretend this is an actual story. And so I think that politically, it is a good idea to put the onus on Trump and ask him why he won't undo the deal, which he has the absolute power to do.
Right. Well, I would love to see them try to answer the question. I can't think of anything that they would be able to do.
He undid the Paris Accords. He undid TPP.
So he says.
He says he's going to undo NAFTA.
Right.
Why won't he undo this?
I cannot think of any good reason. Well, it's a private sector. It's not.
I have a good reason for you. I got 3 words for why he won't do it. PP tape.
Does that count? Just 2 words, PP?
I said 3.
Oh, right.
Oh, you're saying it's 2 words, P-P?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering whether that's, did you really give me 2 words there or 3? I don't know. Well,
it's that's
it's 1 word twice.
Okay, I'll have to look it up. Maybe PP is 1 word.
We should have a hearing on it.
Well, the thing is, P is a word.
It is.
But PP is maybe 1 word, too. You're right.
I'll ask a 5-year-old. That tape is real, by the way. I just want to put that out there. I'm holding out hope. I don't know what it's going to do. You know what? They won't do anything now anyway. The last 10 months have, I think, numbed us to everything. I don't care even if it's Trump doing the actual urinating. It's not going to work.
No, I agree. It's not going to. It's the I can pee on Fifth Avenue line.
Yeah.
I can pee on hookers on Fifth Avenue and they'll still vote for me.
Right. I can pee on the voters. And
he can pee on the vote. Well, that's what he's doing.
He's doing it.
And he's calling it rain.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what to say except once again, as you were mentioning Wolf Blitzer doing it, I'm envisioning him in his stupid voice saying that Hillary Clinton sold uranium to terrorists. We'll be right back.
He did it in an interview with Eric Swardwell yesterday.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
So I'm sure he will.
I think there's uranium.
So anyway,
in
that's what I got on
apartment.
Uranium One. It's a non-story, but it is a political opportunity in my view.
Okay. Well, I
we
think
can reinforce his Russia his debt to Russia. We can reinforce the point that he is beholden to Putin and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think the opportunity is. Now, listen, I know some people would rather it just go away. Is it going to just go away? I don't think it will. So I say if it's going to be out there, make it something to use.
Okay.
But that's my point of view. On
I
the
agree.
Whitefish deal, I listened to you and I've been reading, and I would add to your reporting,
Okay.
or to what you've been broadcasting.
Yeah, I didn't
It
report
now
anything.
is being opposed by members of the governor's party
Oh,
in Puerto Rico.
I mean, it looks terrible, so I can,
Oh,
I
it's
can
a mess.
imagine that they
It's
would.
a mess. And what's happened, you'll recall the other day I was on, I told you what was going to happen, that there was going to be an emergency manager, a czar named
Yes.
and that happened.
Yeah.
I predict today that on October 30th, when the local government's quote-unquote audit and review of the Whitefish contract is revealed, they'll find that it is flawed, and they will declare that it has to be canceled.
Well, it's pretty flawed. I mean, this tweet storm from Ken Klippenstein has a lot of things, a lot of amazing things in it, including, of course, what they are charging for. But then, of course, the phrase or the clause in Article 59 that basically no government agency is allowed to audit or review the cost and profit elements of the labor rates specified here. And there's also a bit here that says PREPA waives any claim against contractor related to delayed completion of the work as well. So you can't sue us for not doing the work. You can't sue us for the amount we're charging you for the work. And you're really not even allowed to review this contract, which is amazing. But apparently something you can get away with in today's atmosphere. I alluded to the banking situation, the elimination of the Consumer Fraud Protection Bureau regulations allowing people to file class action suits against their banks when they were cheated and not be forced into binding arbitration. And big favor, of course, to the corporate banks and Wall Street. No surprise to see the Republican Congress do that, of course, unless you believed in economic populism, in which case you're an idiot anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's why Mike Pence cast the tie-breaking vote for that.
Yes, because he's such a populist. His wife allowed him to enter the chamber, even though there were other women in it, and cast the tie-breaking vote. I thought that maybe the thing to do when he arrived to vote was everybody should have run out except, Dianne Feinstein or something, and then he would have had to leave. I can't cast this vote. The only other person in this room is a woman, and my wife's not here. I got to leave. Sorry. Somebody else's suggestion was that Democrats take a knee, and then he would be forced to leave. Two good possibilities, but the Democrats just won't fight. And of course, the Republicans didn't leave the chamber. Orrin Hatch stays as a chaperone, and that's all it would take to spoil my plan. But that news. I have a nice, of course, David Dayen piece on that, and a couple of others, including an opinion piece from the Washington Post, which pretty strongly condemns this thing. It's just part and part. That's not even Trumpish. That's just plain Republican. They've been trying to tamper with the ability of regular people to have their day in court forever, which is amazing to me, because at the same time that they were always saying they were in favor of devolving American government to the most local possible level. I mean, this is the most local thing you've got is a jury of 12 of your peers, actually literally from your neighborhood, essentially. They have to be around where you live, and you get to go and tell them what you think the government should do on your behalf. And that's a terrible fright to corporations who might lose money because they do terrible things like have ridiculous contracts and claim that you can't review it, and that you have to do binding arbitration in Timbuktu in order to make it work. And of course, a great explanation in all of this of binding arbitration, and the fact that some people are not even clear on this one, that very often in binding arbitration, the corporation that requires it is also responsible for paying the arbitration authority. They pay the judge in your case, and they bring all their cases exclusively to that judge, and gee whiz, they seem to win an awful lot. And of course, paying for something we now know is collusion with Russia, no matter who you're paying. And I think we ought to execute all Republicans as a result. Thank you, Sebastian. That was a great idea.
There is a path that would be interesting on this question of the prohibition on forced arbitration.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you repeal that law? Did that, to me, at this point, that doesn't preclude a state from imposing that law for any bank in its jurisdiction. Someone would make a preemption argument, and just for those who don't know, preemption means that federal law has precluded a state law in the same area. Arguably, someone would argue that this is what the federal government just did, but let's test it. And this goes to this question of local control. And you took it down to the jury level, but let me go to the more traditional idea. Okay, the federal government's not going to force a federal rule on prohibiting forced arbitration. Well, then let's let the states do it. Because I can tell you, if California did it, and New York did it, and Illinois did it, that's a lot of banking business that I don't know that banks would want to abandon the California market. And at that point, do they just have to allow it in California? But then in Alabama, they can just force arbitration. Well, then that's where we are. But I'd be curious to see if they would be how that would play out. But I don't know what's happening there. I actually would love to hear David Dayan on that point. As you said, he's very, very well informed on that.
We can bring that one up. I don't know what the language of the legislation they just passed is. I wouldn't be surprised if they buried somewhere in there some sort of preemption language. But
it would not surprise me either. I'll be honest, I have not looked at it that closely. I just read the reports. I did not look at the legislation at all. But if it's possible, I suggest states do it.
Okay. Go ahead, guys. Get on.
Yeah, and even if it's not possible, do it. Make somebody come in and sue.
Well, that's true. Yeah, you might lose. Go for it anyway. Quite honestly,
it's
I
good
think
politics.
That's a good point.
It's good politics too.
Yeah. Well, you've had some good suggestions for some good political moves already.
Right. Listen, I'm a mastermind. I've won so many elections, you know.
Right. Donald Trump can yell about you.
Speaking of the peanut gallery and politics, which includes me.
Peanut. Yes. Okay. Right. Yeah. All right.
Peanut gallery.
I was wondering what gallery you were talking about.
The peanut gallery.
Yeah.
Those of us who throw peanuts at politicians and their campaigns, which we have all been doing at Jeremy Northam. That's the actor. Ralph Northam. Wow.
He should run
where'd
too.
that come from?
I don't know. That's a new one for me. Okay, yeah.
Well, there is an actor named that, but what a weird thing. But it's Ralph Northam,
yes,
of course.
Right.
Doctor, vet, apparently lackluster politician, which maybe is, maybe isn't. I have no idea.
Yeah,
they've been shooting arrows at his campaign.
Yeah.
All of us in the peanut gallery. I've got my opinions on it, but I'm a little more humble about the Virginia race, and you obviously live in Virginia.
I do.
So this is hugely important to you and your family. What kind of campaign do you think Northam has been running? Are you comfortable with what you've seen?
It's been pretty low profile. Ralph Northam, I don't know if I voted for Northam in the primary. I don't think I did. And it was largely he's not a super energetic out there guy, which is unfair perhaps, not only because that's not absolutely necessary for good governance, although it's very frequently very helpful in electioneering, which leads to the possibility of good governance. And I think they've done a good job in the last couple weeks of coming back against the accusation from when it's made by Republicans that he is either unavailable or not frequently seen doing big events that which is the benchmark by which lay people measure whether or not the government is effective. Is he on TV saying he's doing things or no? No, he's not. But he's, like I said, good comebacks. He's a doctor, and he still practices. And the accusations leveled against him by the Gillespie campaign that he doesn't show up for work. He didn't go to this meeting about Homeland Security or something. And the answer is, yeah, he's a pediatric neurologist, and he was treating kids with serious disease, or was volunteering at a remote area medical clinic. That's what he was hitting back with today. While I was volunteering to treat people for free at a remote area medical clinic because people in rural Virginia can't afford any kind of health insurance, even under Obamacare in some cases, and just don't have access to the providers, even if they do have insurance. I went and did that. I gave my time and treated patients while the guy who's now attacking me on Gillespie's behalf, Donald Trump, has been puttering around the golf course and driving over the greens. He's golfing. Well, I'm treating people.
He's had great tweets on it.
Yeah.
And they released videos. I don't know if they will turn into ads. I think Trump attacking him is great for him, but I don't know. Maybe maybe the strategy was to keep it low key and not energize Trump voters to Gillespie by taking on Trump. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know. But at this point, that strategy seems to have gone, it's basically wasted in the sense that Trump decided to go after him yesterday.
Well, he was going to do
with
that.
two or three tweets in support of Gillespie. Gillespie, by the way, has yet to mention Donald Trump, and in his list of endorsers does not include Donald Trump as endorsing him. So
usually that would infuriate Trump and make him angry and say he's a loser, but he's learned nothing from Luther Strange, I guess, and he's just, look, someone handed me a Republican, I'm just going to say he's great.
Well, yeah, and he just, for whatever reason, I don't know why, he decided to interject himself. I don't know if Gillespie asked or didn't ask. Of course, Gillespie is running, as you pointed out, the campaign that supports running over people with cars who are protesting Nazis, and that's his platform.
Yeah,
that's pretty consistent with Donald Trump. So I'm not sure why he would shy away from Trump if he's going to run that. David Neer, of course, highlighted that Gillespie's latest ad features a woman who wrote an article condemning Republicans for Charlottesville, which makes no sense, as David pointed out. I don't know if you saw David's tweets on that.
It doesn't, but
I think her name was Steele. She's an attorney in your neck of the woods in Northern Virginia, and she accused Northam of being in favor of pedophilia or something like that.
Oh, sure.
One of those ads. So it was all very weird. I don't know enough. I do know that in the past, the Democrats in Virginia who have won the governor's race, Mark Warner and then Tim Kaine, are relatively boring.
Yes,
politicians. Terry McAuliffe is
that's true.
Is a
I
character.
Didn't know where you were going there,
but I'm not sure that McAuliffe won because he was a character. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But the traditional winning Virginia Democratic candidate for governor has been Northam-like, rather quiet and boring and competent. Has been the message that's they generally portray. Is that going to work? I don't know. I'm no expert in Virginia politics or politics in general, but my own feeling is that if you can get Trump to be against you in a blue or purple state, that's probably a good thing. So my instinct would have been to pick a fight with Trump. Trump picked a fight with Northam. He's taking him up on it. So at least as of today, I'm fairly pleased with where they're going with that campaign.
Well, I'm hopeful, and I've never been super excited about Virginia Democratic politics at the gubernatorial level because, as you point out, it just tends to be relatively boring people, which is great. Again, great for governance, and if it works, it works. So fingers crossed that past performance means something.
Yeah. The good news that came out this morning was a new poll, the Wasson poll, that has Northam 50, Gillespie 43. What freaked people out was a Hampton University poll, which people seem to think was flawed in a lot of ways. Again, I'm not familiar with what the criticisms were, but that one had Gillespie up 8, but with like 28% undecided, which seemed a high number considering the elections in a couple of weeks. But we are where we are, and you got to leave it to the people who are running the campaign, it seems to me.
Well, you definitely have to do that because you got no choice. There's 2 weeks left. But, it was pointed out yesterday, I guess Gillespie's latest round of ads makes it pretty clear where he stands. He's kind of sidling up to the thing, but I guess the story was that he was attacking Northam as the guy who would take down our statues all over the state, which of course, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We know that means the Confederate statues. And really, at this late date, to pull that out as your last round of attack ads amounts, as I said, to a declaration that you're going to be the pro-Charlottesville murder candidate. Okay, I'll allow you to run with that one. It turned the state into a laughingstock, was a huge national embarrassment, and he says we need more. We'll talk about more about it after this short break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We're back still with Armando here. Got a lot to round up here, and a lot of directions we could be going in here. And I'm wondering which one to start with. Well, you know what? As a matter of fact, why don't we turn just briefly at least. I think David Dayen's article is not all that long. And if you're going to get an explanation of Republicans disassembling consumer protections, he's the guy you want to get it from. This is a couple of days ago, actually, and so it puts it in a slightly different context, still relevant, but, it's funny the way news cycles work now. This feels like ancient history. Look at his headline for The Intercept. After a day of feuding, Jeff Flake and Bob Corker joined Trump to upend a major consumer protection. Remember when that happened? Jeff Flake changed history with this earth-shattering speech. All right, well, whatever. With national attention focused Tuesday morning on a mushrooming feud between President Donald Trump and Senator Bob Corker. Mushroom, that's a good hint that we're going to go back to nuclear energy. Followed by a feud in the afternoon between Trump and Senator Jeff Flake, the Senate gift-wrapped the biggest present Congress has so far bestowed upon Wall Street in the Trump era. With a razor-thin margin, the Senate passed a resolution to nullify a signature regulation from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's not a law. It's not statutory. So we'll keep that in mind. Which, anyway, this CFPB regulation banned forced arbitration provisions. Such clauses, tucked into the fine print of contracts that nobody reads, deny consumer. And by the way, if you think you're smart and you're going to read the contract, then I advocate that you do. It's in the fine print. You should always be aware of such things. Now you've read it, and your choice is, do I want a bank account or do I not want one? Because that's all it is. I'll stuff my money in my mattress or I'll swallow this arbitration clause because every bank uses it. Because there's huge amounts of money in it. That's why.
And you'll remember from law school, David, those are called adhesion contracts.
Yes. There's no way out of this. And there's no bank that doesn't do the same thing. I suppose it's possible that there are some somewhere, maybe credit unions, whatever. But basically, read the contract. I know we say nobody reads it. Be smart. Read your contract, true. But there's literally nothing you're going to be able to do about this one. It's like the iTunes user agreement. Are you going to use iTunes or you're not? You going to use your phone? Yes? Okay. You're stuck. All right. Well, at any rate, they're in the contracts.
Yes. It's also obviously more defensible with iTunes. You can say, well, do I really need iTunes? But it's impossible to live in this world without a bank account.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. It's virtually impossible.
It's virtually impossible to live if you're in if you're in a position to start a bank account, because there's a bank near you, you're in pretty good shape to begin with. So, yeah, if you're living that lifestyle, yes. If you're living, where millions of others are, where there's no bank that will open its doors anywhere near you and you don't have any money anyway, You can live without a bank account. It just sucks, and it closes a hell of a lot of opportunities off. Not a good way to deal with life if you can avoid it. But big point there is most people can't. All right. Well, as we were saying, so read the contract, whatever. There's nothing you can do about it. Anyway, those provisions deny consumers the ability to contest claims through a class action lawsuit and can allow banks and other financial institutions to rip off their customers with virtual impunity. Both Corker and Flake, along with Senator John McCain, maverick that he is, joined in the effort to give Trump a major win, even if it will hurt many of their own voters. They don't care. Consumer advocates had hoped that moderate Republican Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins would block the GOP effort. They did not. Only Republican Senators Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and John Kennedy of Louisiana bucked their party, but that's as many as they could lose without screwing things up, and then everybody else had to toe the line. But a no vote when the measure passes is not much of a bucking, David points out. In a sign of how far the Democratic Party has come in recent years, all 48 members of the Senate caucus voted to keep the arbitration rule. The vote was split 50-50, which required Vice President Mike Pence to break the tie. To secure his victory, Trump enlisted an ex-Wells Fargo attorney, acting comptroller of the currency Keith Noreika, and a former bank CEO, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, to do the dirty work. The Senate vote came a day after the Treasury entered the fray with guns blazing. The House passed its version of the resolution within just a couple of weeks of the CFPB finalizing the rule in July, but continuing reports of petty consumer fraud at Wells Fargo and a data breach of over 140 million customers at the credit reporting bureau Equifax made it difficult for the Senate to proceed. So they waited until you forgot about it, and then they did it. Both Wells Fargo and Equifax have attempted to use arbitration clauses in their financial contracts to force victims out of class action litigation. The scandals put a human face on the practice of companies forcing customer disputes through a secret, non-judicial process. Days before the vote, Americans for Financial Reform addressed this directly in a video featuring a woman with disabilities and a veteran who were ripped off by Wells Fargo and then prevented from getting their day in court because of an arbitration clause. To pursue such cases, which typically involve small amounts of money, through arbitration, victims need to spend heavily on legal representation and hearings. As federal Judge Richard Posner of the Seventh Circuit of Court of Appeals once wrote in a ruling, the realistic alternative to a class action is not 17 million individual suits, but 0 individual suits, as only a lunatic or fanatic sues for $30. What's going on here, just long story short, if you didn't grasp it, is the bank cheats you out of $50 for a penalty that you didn't really accrue, a early withdrawal or a low balance fee that actually exists in the contract. You know, I know that if my balance goes below $1,000, I'm going to be fined $50. But that's why I keep $10,000 in that bank account. Let's say, good on you if you do, but whatever. But so you never come anywhere close to it. But they just charge it anyway. And they say, oh, it's an error or whatever. Maybe and suppose you catch them. They say, oh, I'm sorry about that. And either they don't refund you the money or they take their sweet time about it and refund the money after you call them 15 times. It takes them a year to do it. In the meantime, they're earning interest on this money. $30 to you means nothing, but they have 10 million customers. So they make millions with fake penalties, and nobody's going to go to court and spend $100,000 suing over the $30, $50, $100 in false fees. But if everybody gets together, you know how class action suits work, and the lawyers essentially take care of it, and your part in it is you get a postcard that says, hey, do you want $50? Sign here. If we win, we'll send you your $50. That's it, and that's the way these things get done. Otherwise, people say, I'm furious, but screw it. Anyway, consumers, by the way, David continues, don't typically fare well in arbitration. An Economic Policy Institute report showed that consumers only win 9% of arbitration cases, and banks almost always win when they issue counterclaims, with the consumer paying $7,725 on average. So if you have any ideas about I'll go to arbitration over my $50. It ends up costing you $100,000 in legal fees, and you end up paying the bank $7,000. You never see your $50. This is why corporations like the arbitration process. It prevents those wronged from pursuing their legal rights, and in practice alters the law by making small claims virtually unenforceable. In other words, arbitration clauses are licensed to steal, and it contributes to a fundamental breakdown in the justice system in which complaints can only be heard in a privatized setting. So, in July, in a rare instance of the government using an outright ban instead of requiring disclosure or some other half measure, the CFPB finished a rule preventing arbitration agreements in financial contracts from stopping consumers who band together with other victims in a class action lawsuit. But Republicans managed to twist the issue into one in which corporations needed to be protected from greedy trial lawyers. So it goes on for just a little bit more, and it paints a very dark picture, obviously, of it, and it deserves to be read, and I may continue with it, but that's the basics of what's going on here. It's essentially, like he said, a continued license to steal, and the more you steal, of course, the more you can siphon off for campaign contributions to pay off people who continue to give you and renew your license to steal. It's a very neat package, and thanks for the economic populism, jackass. I can't wait to lose some more. Anyway, was there anything else I don't know if you wanted to change the direction of the show or make comment, Armando, but I'm sure you're enjoying listening.
That story, I thought there's one thing that
yeah?
I didn't hear, that at least maybe he tweeted it out. There are some banks that do not have forced arbitration clauses. And credit unions, by the way, almost never have them.
Yeah.
So to the degree that you live in a community that has a credit union, you may want to take a look at that.
Yeah. Credit unions are a terrific invention and regulated differently. I don't think he makes mention of this. There's got to be some bank somewhere that...
Well, I think he mentioned, and they're a pretty bad bank, but I think he said Bank of America.
Oh, yeah?
And I find them to be a pretty bad bank, but that's different.
Yeah, I hear a lot of
complaints. Than this, they apparently say, okay, I'm a bad bank, but you can sue me for being bad.
That's the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, I don't see the mention of that in here, but it's largely true that, and I'm certain that there are some banks, I don't know whether they'll advertise the fact, but that don't appear to have this. But these sorts of things grow pretty quickly in the industry because they're profit centers, and eventually some executive, even at Bank of America, will say, I can put another, $200 million in the in our balance sheet if we just make this change. I mean, that's my estimate of how much we'll save from going to court and how many dollars we can steal without people resorting to any sort of legal remedy, and whatever we can scrape away in counterclaims against people who do sue us. I think we'll make $200 million or so, and if you allow me to put this program in place, I'll only take $50 million of that in bonus, and you can keep the other $150 million. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of the facts is, there were major fines handed down, but, it was a drop in the bucket. And you've made this point a million times. And that is, if I can make $100 million and pay a $20 million fine, guess what? I still made $80 million.
Yeah, right. And if I can spend $1 million to make it illegal to take my $20 million, then, or to rescind the law that allowed the government to fine me the $20 million, then great.
Even better.
Next time around, I make $90 million.
So I made $99 million.
Yeah.
So listen, to coin a phrase, it's a rigged system.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there's
and the funny thing, of course, just to circle back, not to change the subject, but to expand on it.
Yes.
Donald Trump ran on what? Draining the swamp and all this other nonsense,
Sure.
and economic populism. And the newspapers and all media outlets went out and interviewed all these Trump supporters.
Yes.
It was complete BS. And that's not why they voted for him. This is the problem I have sometimes with my fellow Democrats who pretend this was an actual reason. Listen, it was cultural. You don't even have to call it racial. It was cultural. They felt dissed, put upon. White men are getting the bad end of the stick. Maybe they are. My point is, don't think it has to do with, it's because everyone's defending the big banks. They don't care that everyone's defending the big banks. If you're voting for Trump, there's no surprise that Trump did this. What is he now pushing now? The biggest tax cuts ever.
Yes, that's what he likes to say.
That's not economic populism. It's never been. It never will be.
Yeah.
And everybody knows it, but what are we kidding? Who are we kidding here? The estate tax repeal.
Right.
What? So everybody has $5.5 million estates? You know the numbers.
Yeah.
That's 0.2% of the population might have that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why. That's one of the great mysteries of politics of all times is how they convinced people to worry about the estate tax who have nothing whatsoever to leave in their estate. And even if you have a considerable amount of money to leave in the estate, you have to have like serious major millions of dollars in order to be caught up in this thing. And I think the first excuse was, well, sometimes family farms can be worth that much money. Okay, fine. Well, we'll take them out of it. All right. So now you're really basically only talking about people who own very large businesses or who have piles, huge piles, like double-digit million dollars of piles, and who want to give it to, want to keep it in the family. Okay, it's a nice place to keep it. But how many people have got that? And the answer is like 100 a year.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But suppose you just believe that shouldn't exist, that the estate tax is bad, it's double tax. Any of those crazy theories, suppose those are legitimate.
They're not. Go ahead.
It's still not economic populism. That's worrying about rich people.
Yeah. But one day you could have $100 million and die before you have the opportunity to plan your estate and put your money in a trust so that it doesn't get taxed anyway, which is what, why we say only like 100 people a year that this happens to. First of all, only a very, very, very tiny percentage of people have enough money. And two, only a very, very, very tiny percentage of people who do have enough money haven't planned around it and just simply worked up trust papers that virtually exempt them from the tax anyway. This is, you're talking about rich and lazy and stupid people. Like, okay.
That's a great point, because the reality is to get an actual value of $5.5 million in your estate means you did no estate planning if you have a $10 million estate.
Yeah.
That's the truth. You're absolutely right.
I shouldn't be encouraging people to work around the taxes and cheat and all that. But look, everybody does it, and we're constantly reminded of that. The president told us that in his debate. Yeah, I don't pay taxes because you'd squander it. I cheat all the time. Makes me
Only
smart.
Stupid people pay taxes.
Yeah, he just told you.
Little people.
Right. It makes me smart to not pay taxes. All right. Well, fine. How about an idiot
his phrase?
tax?
That makes me smart. That's what he said in the debate, right?
Yes.
Wow.
So I propose a tax on only those people who are incredibly rich and very dumb and lazy. Is that cool? Are we cool with taxing those people? No. I want to be one of those people. All right. It's aspirational. I can't wait to be dumb. Okay.
And if you're 55, and it's kind of late, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm talking about the white male 55-year-old who works at a factory.
Okay.
Dude, your estate's not going to be $5.5 million.
I could win the lottery.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
That's why I say 100 people a year. Nobody's having this problem. But, oh, my God, death tax. We all die.
The death tax.
Right? Yes, we all die. Okay. What happens to your estate if you are killed by a North Korean nuclear weapon? I'm just curious. Does that change anything?
Well,
that's it. At least my taxes were low.
My taxes were low, but again, it's not. It's just understanding that in my view, the Trump's appeal was not economic in any way, other than saying, "Oh, he's a businessman; he knows how to make money or something." You might have been fooled by the nonsense because, of course, as we detailed for 2 years, he was a terrible businessman. He's a guy who bankrupted a casino.
Yes, right. Yes, the casino actually lost money. He didn't. He stole all the money. But, he
did. But he bankrupted the casino. Of course, he stole a lot of the money, but
right.
The casino went into bankruptcy. Now, normally, if you're a good businessman, you can make a lot of money in profit and still have a thriving casino because that has value, and then you can sell it. He ended up having to pay people to take over the casino. Right.
That's true. That's out there. By the way, here's a comment I have to share with you from Thelonious, Thelonious08, if you're looking for him on Twitter, a listener to the show, who says, some days you have a lung doctor on the air, and on other days you have a guy who really needs a lung doctor. Maybe I should get the two of you together. Every once in a while, and you're seized by the coughing.
That's true. Well, I've been fighting a cold the last few days, but it's true.
I should get the two of you on the air.
Where is Dr. Greg? Where did he go?
Well, Greg, we need you. This is true. He's primarily in pediatrics, I believe, but I'm certain he could give you a good hint on what to do.
It's better than a veterinarian like Kramer. So it's my daily Seinfeld reference.
In the absence of Greg's help, though, I suppose we'll turn to Gwyneth Paltrow will tell you what to do. You're going to have to aspirate a jade egg, I think, and see if it works for you.
Gwyneth Paltrow makes me think of Harvey Weinstein, which now makes me think of Mark Halperin and Chris Cillizza.
Chris Cillizza. Why?
Chris Cillizza, who famously said that the Democrats have a Harvey Weinstein problem.
Oh, yes. Right. Journalists now have
we're waiting with bated breath for the media has a Mark Halperin problem.
Right.
Column, but
that is true. I did see a lot of people pointing out on Twitter the other day, I guess he was hot on the trail of the dossier fake story. He was saying, how could it be that Hillary Clinton didn't know that this was being paid for? And he asked, how did you not know Mark Halperin?
Generally you insulate the candidate, he's saying. So that's completely believable.
All right.
But he said, how did John Podesta not know?
He was busy on Polenta.
Well, I think Robbie must have known, and he was the campaign manager. I think the specifics of whether I assume Podesta knew there was opposition research going on. I assume what he denied was knowing that it was done by Fusion GPS and who had hired Michael Steele. Of course, that story is complicated too, in that it started with a Republican candidate in the primaries, which again is also normal.
Right.
Here's what Marco Rubio said: he doesn't know anything about Oppo research on Trump, or he wasn't involved in it. I said, well, then you ran a crappy campaign. No wonder he kicked your butt.
Yeah. Well, I doubt very much that he doesn't know anything about opposition research, but he did run a crappy campaign, so that's good cover.
He did.
He did very well. I have to run a crappy campaign because I embarrassed myself saying lying about not knowing about opposition research, so I have to lose to cover my ass. That's a possibility.
He is such a phony. I don't know why. That guy really, really annoys me. We got to beat him next time, but maybe we can't. But I can't stand him. I think he's the phoniest guy imaginable.
Well, there are many of them out there. By the way, brought to my attention, I knew there would be at least one, and Rebecca Romans has found us the next sexual predator story. Yet another high-profile sexual predator, and I have to find out a way to read this excerpt without losing anybody their broadcast license. But Matt Taibbi and Mark Ames.
Well, that was old from Russia. Is there something new?
Is that no? I think that's it. The old thing. Who pays attention to that?
They bragged about it. They've bragged about it. I mean, both of those guys are pretty disgusting.
I don't keep tabs on those guys, but I do see that. I see people complaining about them all the time, but not because sexual harassment. But I guess it's true, and the people who do keep receipts on sexual harassment and issues surrounding it. The feminists, well, they had them filed, and they were able to bring this thing out. And I guess it comes from an excerpt from their memoir, which I didn't even realize there was such a thing because I don't keep tabs on those guys. But
yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess they're next.
I know. Look, I mean,
it kills book deals.
Maybe a lot of the listeners don't know, but Taibbi and Ames worked in Russia. They had some type of publishing project, and
Russia. Well, yeah.
And it didn't go that well, but they wrote a book about it. And in the book, they talked about their sexual abuse of the Russian women that worked for them.
Yes.
They bragged about it. They bragged about it.
Says,
in the most disgusting way possible. I mean, if you're interested in finding out the details, they're out there. But you'll see that Taibbi doesn't talk about it anymore. Ames, I don't know, but Taibbi is obviously going to be very silent about any sexual harassment story, so he can't really cover any of those things. And he was a pretty disgusting guy. There's just no two ways about it.
Yeah, I've just read or skimmed the excerpt. There are a number of items that will jump out and grab the eye, and I don't think I can really talk about any of them. But I guess everyone in the world knew about this except me, because I don't read anything he does. Because Mark Ames, I just see a lot more complaints about. Matt Taibbi, I see lots of lavish praise lavished upon him, and I find his articles too long and infuriating, and I don't get through them. But,
yeah, well, look, you've seen the excerpt. I'll read one so you know that.
Okay.
This is Ames writing. He says, watching us harass the young female staff had to be the most painful part, because we never in a million years have thought of harassing him.
What?
Really? Yeah, exactly. Watching us harass the young female.
That sounds
staff.
funny.
Very good, Mark. And here's a quote from one of the staff. You know, I'm not PC, but there's a limit. You go too far. You're always trying to force Masha and Sveta under the table to give you blowjobs.
Well,
it's not funny. They don't think it's funny, Kara complained. But it is funny, Matt said, Matt Taibbi. We have been pretty rough on our girls, says Mark Ames. We'd ask our Russian staff to flash their asses or breasts for us. We'd tell them if they wanted to keep their jobs, they'd have to perform unprotected anal sex with us. Nearly every day we asked our female staff if they approved of anal sex. That was a fixation of ours.
Yeah, you'll have to stop there, I think. I'm looking at this.
Did I discuss you enough?
Yeah. Well, I can see the rest of it, and the next part, I know will get us in trouble, so we'll stop there. But
I stopped there. I used the clinical terms. I don't think I used one profane word.
No. Well, I think technically, I think they'd have a problem with one or two of them, but okay. I think we survived, and it's not us. That's true. How interesting.
Oh, I thought it was okay. I apologize.
Marcy Wheeler got away with that term, so on MSNBC once. So, she didn't get away with it. Okay. She was blackballed.
I will leave you with one thought. Those were the description given by Mark Ames. This wasn't the victims. This was them.
I thought
this is his description.
Yes, and Matt agreeing, but it is funny. They've just told you, listen, I need to tell you something. It's not funny, but it is. He's going to mansplain how funny sexual harassment is. That's okay. I'm convinced. I guess that's all it need. That's all I need. You're guilty, not you. But you are now for reading it on the air, making people uncomfortable. Plus, that's collusion as well. So, okay.
Well, sorry about that.
I can live with it.
I apologize, FCC.
Yeah, they care. Okay. Well, we got to get set for our last break here, and I do think I'm going to turn back to the nuclear power issue because there's some weird stuff going on here. I don't know if you want to hang on or you've got work to do. I'll let you explore that. And we'll be back then.
I'll see if I can take something for my cold.
Thanks, Armando. You do that.
All right.
We'll be back after this break. Welcome back now to the final segment of today's Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's turn things back, at least briefly. I think there might be something here, and I'm trying to read and skim through these articles on the fly to see whether there's something really be woven together here. Armando had mentioned a Lawfare article that tells us more than we need to know, although everybody needs to know everything they can, about Uranium-1, but more than we can fit in the last segment and more than is necessarily useful for making the possible connection I'm thinking of here. But Unpacking Uranium-1, Hype and Law by Paul Rosenzweig is written and released this morning. Armando referred to it, made a couple of the points out of it. We'll read the lead just to give you an idea of what's going on here. The latest instance of whataboutism is the House Republican decision to open an investigation into the Uranium-1 transaction. The allegation that Hillary Clinton transferred control of 20% of America's uranium mining output to a Russian company in exchange for substantial contributions to the Clinton Foundation from the executives of that same Russian company. Perhaps fearing future revelations of Trump's closeness to Russia, the evident purpose of the investigation is to establish a Hillary 2 counterpoint. Based on what is currently available in the public record, little, if anything, about the allegation is plausible. In this post, I want to summarize the legal context and known facts regarding the transfer and put the allegations of impropriety in context. I focus exclusively on the transfer and the U.S. government's approval of it. I am not, in this post, considering the evidence, such as it is, of donations to the Clinton Foundation. My reasoning is simple. If there is no quo to be given, the question of quid is moot. So, extensive discussion of the legal background and the process through which this decision was made. And it dates way back, and it's pretty interesting. And, a lot of it was used, I guess, by Armando for his support of the position that, well, if Donald Trump thinks this is so dangerous, he should do something about it. As it mentions here, since the 1950s, U.S. law has given the president the authority to block transactions that he deems a national security risk to the United States. And beginning in 1975, under President Gerald Ford, an interagency committee, CFIUS, that he mentioned, the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. This CFIUS was chartered to advise the president on how to exercise that authority that he has had since the 1950s. And further significant amendments to the process were made in 2007. Today, CFIUS operates pursuant to, do you need to know? I'll tell you. Section 721 of the Defense Production Act of 1950, as amended by the Foreign Investment and National Security Act of 2007. So there you go. It's a long-standing and recently revisited law. Okay, he's got the authority to do that. What else can we quickly pull from this article? Here, this section, Uranium-1 and Rosatom, I don't know what they say, Rosatom or Rosatom, probably atomic power. Uranium-1 is a uranium mining and processing company headquartered in Toronto. It has mining operations all over the world, including Canada, U.S., South Africa, Australia, and Kazakhstan. The last are some of the biggest uranium mines in the world. The operations in the U.S., in Wyoming, mine a volume of uranium that is roughly 20% of the annual American production. It is that production, reasonably considered a potential issue of national security interest, that caused Uranium-1 to come to the attention of CFIUS. In 2010, a Russian company, ARMZ Uranium Holding, purchased a 51% interest in Uranium-1. ARMZ was at the time a subsidiary of Rosatom, the Russian State Atomic Energy Corporation, a non-profit appendage of the government. It is fair, then, to say that the 2010 transaction involved the purchase of a controlling interest in Uranium-1 by the Russian government. The transaction is said to have been valued, or rather, to have valued Uranium-1 at more than $1 billion, which is a... It's almost hilarious to see that, oh my God, the uranium mines, how much must those be worth? $1 billion. I mean, that's like the lunch tab at Facebook these days. Think about how much the valuation there is and stuff like that. Uranium, $1 billion. Facebook, 50 bazillion. Anyway, Since that time, ARMZ has been extinguished in corporate reorganization, and Rosatom purchased the remaining 49% of Uranium One. So today, Rosatom owns the entire company directly. The Canadians apparently had no difficulty with this. In addition to approval from CFIUS, the Russian purchase required and received approval from Canadian, South African, and Kazakh authorities. And you know those Kazakh authorities are notoriously tough. Maybe. To secure approval from CFIUS, Rosatom is reported to have promised to retain the Uranium One corporate management and corporate structure, not breaking up the company. So we protected the jobs. That's nice. In addition, that way you'll still be earning when we kill you. All right. In addition, the mining licenses would remain with the U.S. subsidiaries controlled by U.S. persons. In addition, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission reviewed the transaction and gave its approval. It's excerpted and with emphasis added below. Nuclear Regulatory Commission apparently had no problem with this thing. By all reports, there was little controversy over the transaction, which occurred during President Obama's reset with Russia. Still, it's fair to say that the degree of scrutiny of this transaction seems less than the 2009 proposed purchase of a gold mine by Chinese interests, which was ultimately withdrawn in light of CFIUS objections. That is interesting. But, it's not like Republicans didn't have any members in Congress at the time and weren't professionally in opposition to everything and anything the Obama administration was doing. So where were they in all this? And I guess asleep because they thought Benghazi was going to save them. I don't know. Well, is the timing wrong on that? Probably. What can we glean from all this? He writes, these are bullet points. First, I should say, it is unlikely that Secretary Clinton personally participated in the transaction. Her assistant secretary said she did not intervene, and given the nature of the transaction and apparent lack of controversy, that is a plausible scenario. I can see no reason to doubt this account. Next, the structure of CFIUS is such that no one agency can control the outcome of the consideration, probably entirely by design. They designed CFIUS so that was not ever going to be the case. Here it appears that the entire committee and the NRC were all satisfied with the mitigation put in place. It is a very far stretch to lay this result at state's doorstep. The vigorous objection of any of the security-minded agencies would likely have derailed the transaction, but none, evidently, was forthcoming. I have no doubt that state favored the sale, but that is likely the position it would take today under Secretary Rex Everything Tillerson, and was surely the position it would have taken under Secretaries Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and John Kerry. State has a strong institutional bias in favor of accommodating foreign investment in the United States. Here it seems clear that the Pentagon and DHS did not object either. Next, the inherent bias of the process is to approve transactions, with mitigation if needed. Intervention and blocking are rare and require more than a single agency to be activated. Put another way, no single agency has a veto on the transaction. The transaction goes forward unless a substantial majority of CFIUS is motivated by grave concerns to block it. So the most accurate way to characterize this case is that state, along with other agencies, declined to recommend a presidential veto. Uranium One's licenses are for mining and extraction, not for export, as Armando reminded us. This makes the claim that we, quote, gave away 20% of America's uranium fairly hyperbolic and jerky and a-hole-ish as well, we might as well say, because Donald Trump is the one who said it. The expectation, in light of the NRC's assessment, would have been that the uranium mined would be marketed in America, with the profits going to Russia, which may not be a great thing, but there it is. It is, however, true that the mining rights of 20% of American uranium are now held by a Russian state agency. That is troubling, and had it been me, I would have tried to generate opposition to the sale. It isn't a giveaway, but it is the case that Rosatom has de jure and de facto legal rights that can be exercised to limit production if it wishes to do so. Interesting. That's the dry stuff. So what came to mind? We discussed this, and I think it's actually mentioned in part of the article that I skipped over. But Armando had mentioned it, that I guess CFIUS, one of the things that they did do was intervene in, or I guess the modernization of that Defense Production Act of 1950 that was passed in 2007 was motivated in part by the Dubai ports deal controversy. I'm not certain if I recall exactly how that whole thing went down, but I certainly remember the controversy. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that one in there because I was reminded in all of this of articles we read in a slightly different context some weeks ago. We had a BuzzFeed piece and a Newsweek piece. Remember these headlines? Michael Flynn, Russia, and a grand scheme to build nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia and the Arab world. That was the Newsweek version. And also, Trump advisors secretly met with Jordan's king while one was pushing a huge nuclear power deal. Do you remember those stories? I remember that we read them, but let's see if they are the ones I'm thinking of. Let's see. Yeah, one was much more recent, September, and one was back in January. The September piece, BuzzFeed piece, was Jason Leopold writing this story. Michael Flynn, Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon met with King Abdullah II while Flynn was reportedly pressing for a controversial for-profit deal to build nuclear power plants in the Middle East. Remember this? In the days leading up to Donald Trump's presidential inauguration, when his soon-to-be National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was reportedly pushing a multi-billion-dollar deal to build reactors in Jordan and other Middle Eastern nations, Flynn and two other top Trump advisors held a secret meeting with the King of Jordan. And you'll remember that this was, everything's tied to everything else. All this stuff just cascades down. And you remember this came to light because Republicans were carping about, oh my God, the unmasking situation. Remember, there were the Obama administration National Security Agency requested the unmasking of Americans who had been caught up in foreign surveillance, and the accusation was that they were pursuing the unmasking because they thought they could nail a Trump affiliated person, a high-ranking person in the campaign, when in fact it ended up turning out to be, well, King Abdullah is coming to the United States, and ordinarily it would be absolutely required that he declare that to the State Department and let us be put on notice of his arrival here. And instead, he refused to do it and snuck into the country instead. And we found out about it because we were surveilling all foreign nationals. And I mean, when the King of Jordan comes by, or princes of the UAE or what have you, when they sneak into the country without following protocol, we wonder why. And when we have them recorded, we find out, who are they talking to? What are they doing? Why would somebody try to violate that protocol? That doesn't make any damn sense. Let's see if we can make some sense of their secretiveness. And that's how we found out about these things. The amazing thing here is that a lot of the deal, as we read about it, had to do with some very strange ideas about the way we were going to structure this nuclear deal, including the idea of we're going to build these nuclear power plants in oil-rich Middle Eastern states, which didn't really make a great deal of sense off the bat to begin with. But then there were these concerns that we would have this spent nuclear fuel out there, maybe not being adequately guarded from being purloined by the terrorist organizations that are basically just running around unfettered and unchecked all over the Middle East. Now, that's not the case, obviously, but that's the picture that the Trump world tends to paint of the Middle East. And while there's certainly some threats there, they tend to overstate them pretty regularly. But yeah, you're going to want to be pretty careful about what happens with your spent nuclear fuel. either because it can be used to make actual atomic weapons at some point, if you know how to deal with the spent fuel and convert it to fissionable material for a bomb, or you can simply skip that whole process and simply make the crude, dirty bombs that scatter spent nuclear fuel, which is still highly radioactive, over a wide area and kill people that way. So the concern was maybe we ought not to have giant piles of spent nuclear fuel sitting around in various locations in the Middle East if we aren't able to trust that it will be well guarded. And that's where Eric Prince came into the picture and decided, well, what about if we had Blackwater or Blackwater trained guards, or whatever name they're doing business under these days, handling the security at these plants? And what if we actually extracted the fuel and flew it back to the United States for secure storage here? And what if that was the only way that they were able to operate these plants that we built, because we would build certain specially designed nuclear power plants that can only use a presumably proprietary, like a cartridge of nuclear fuel that would be produced in the United States and flown to them to use to run their reactors, and then ejected in the little cartridge and then sent back to the United States for storage, which, by the way, is a horrible idea on a number of levels, not the least of which is now flying plane loads of spent nuclear fuel back from the Middle East and landing them in the United States, which seems like an awfully tempting terrorist target all by itself. But now I wonder whether we aren't talking about... remember also that part of this deal was that these special proprietary fuel packages were to be produced in special reactors that would be built specifically for the purpose of building these fuel cells and enriching the uranium to the point where it could be used for nuclear fuel in these power plants built throughout the Middle East. It would be enriched in plants that would be built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, right in the middle of our nuclear power research facility down there, and in Norfolk, Virginia, right in the middle of the largest American naval base. So this ties to everything. Can we run an ad that says, we'll get to that, but I guess this is something that Ed Gillespie thinks is a great idea. Now, mind you, that we're talking about providing enriched uranium for power generation purposes to the Middle East. Presumably, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't assume this, but presumably the uranium that would be used for producing these pods would be mined here in the United States, enriched here in the United States, packaged here in the United States, sent to the Middle East, and then once spent, stored here in the Middle East. We get the nuclear waste. Hooray. It is, if nothing goes wrong in between, we end up with a pile of Middle Eastern nuclear waste that we're responsible for storing. But if we're using American-produced uranium, and I suppose it's possible we might be importing the uranium and then enriching it and putting in these fuel pods. But if we're using American uranium, well, there's at least a 20% chance that we'll be paying Rosatom for that uranium as well. And guess what? Russia's back in the deal. Wouldn't that be the most amazing thing in the world if we were ended up investigating Uranium One only to find out that it was yet another instance of Trump, Kushner, Bannon, Flynn collusion with Russia? And you know what? Leave it to those idiots to try and tar Hillary Clinton, who, by all accounts, did not actually become president of the United States early this year, to try and entrap her with some sort of hint that it was Hillary Clinton colluding with the Russians on a nuclear deal. But if anything, even if they're entirely right, the deal was a huge investment in the United States and the opportunity for United States subsidiaries to make a pretty good amount of money, I think, continuing to mine uranium, but this time on behalf of Russian paymasters. Okay, that's the extent of the collusion. Enter now Team Trump, who says, I have an idea. We can privately profit off of my kooky plan to enrich that uranium, fly it to the Middle East, where it becomes depleted nuclear fuel, package it all back up, and then send it back here for storage in the United States, where it can potentially leak and kill everybody, or be stolen and kill everybody. And, of course, in the middle of all of it, handing over control, nominally anyway, of breeder reactors that enrich the fuel in the middle of America's largest naval base and one of America's most important nuclear power and nuclear weapons research facilities, and hand all that over to the very people that we didn't believe were able to take care of their security well enough to just leave their damn nuclear fuel there with them, the Middle Eastern states. What an interesting and exciting dynamic we have here. But in all of it, Eric Prince gets a cut, and I guess I don't know what Jared Kushner's interest in it was, but I'm sure if we look back through these articles, we'll be reminded. Let me go back also to this other one. I for some reason I thought this was from January, but it was actually from June, the Newsweek piece. Michael Flynn, Russia, there is Russia, and a grand scheme to build nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia and the Arab world. I'm sure we must have read this one at the same time. And, I mean, this is a pretty far-flung idea, business plan. It's a bit, when you don't do it yet, when you haven't committed the crime, it's a business plan. When you get around to committing the crime, it's a conspiracy. That's what stage we were in. This is well, it's pretty amazing, really. Wouldn't that be something if it was all tied together? It's hard to tell from the writing and reading it on the fly, but I have a feeling that if we dig far enough into it, at the very least, it begins to highlight some of the hypocrisy of trying to pin Uranium-1 on Hillary Clinton under the theory that she was cutting some sort of sweetheart deal for the Russians to control 20% of American uranium production, when at the same time, with the other hand, the Trump team was looking to use some of that uranium to build a pipeline for dirty bomb production and export it to the Middle East. And if it didn't happen to get stolen, the great bonus was that we would end up storing radioactive waste for hundreds of years on behalf of rich Saudis. What a plan this is. Okay, well, you want to have an investigation? I guess we're going to have an investigation. I have a prediction for you. They're not going to allow any witnesses whatsoever who could help establish this connection, or even witnesses of their own who could help stomp down on this supposition that I've made here. Well, very interesting. We'll see whether this survives or not. All right, we're down to a couple of minutes here, and of course, much to try and sneak in. We'll see whether we can get any of that in there, and we might as well start looking for stories we can use for our Monday recorded show. Speaking of Russians, why don't we sneak this one in here? Foreign Policy had this piece that I thought was pretty interesting. You'll recall, I'm sure you've been tracking it all along, that Russian sanctions bill that the president was presented with by a Congress that was too embarrassed to help him out by quashing the thing, and they put it on his desk and he reluctantly signed. And we figured there would be some sort of a signing statement that just basically said, well, okay, I acknowledge that the law has been passed. I'm just not going to do anything about it. He's done one better than that. He had a deadline which expired 3 weeks ago for announcing the plan to continue with these Russian sanctions and impose new Russian sanctions as directed by the legislation. And he's simply not doing it. What do you do when the president simply says, I don't really care what the law says? Well, you have a constitutional crisis, which now means running around fretting and doing very little else. Well, there's something else to add in addition to his simple non-enforcement of these things. The Trump administration 3 weeks late, of course, on the Russia sanctions deadline, but in addition has killed the office that coordinates them. Yes, the headline here, State Department scraps sanctions office. Yep, the State Department shuttered an office that oversees sanctions policy, even as the Donald Trump administration faced criticism from lawmakers over its handling of new economic penalties against Russia. Secretary of State Rex Everything Tillerson eliminated the Coordinator for Sanctions Policy office, which had been led by a veteran ambassador-rank diplomat with at least 5 staff, as a part of an overhaul of the department, former diplomats and congressional sources told Foreign Policy. Instead, the role coordinating U.S. sanctions across the State Department and other government agencies now falls to just one mid-level official, David Tesler, as a matter of fact, the Deputy Director of the Policy Planning Office. The Policy Planning Office, which previously operated as a small team providing strategic advice to the Secretary, but did not manage programs or initiatives, has grown in power under Tillerson's redesign of the department. In other words, he's got one of those, and he doesn't have anything else, so that guy gets all the power now. So one of the back doors that they've used to actually benefit from the fact that they have no idea who to appoint to any job, and they simply give all the acting authority to the few people that they've managed to install. It's a real problem. While the sanctions office was dissolved, the administration missed a key October 1st deadline to implement new penalties against Russia adopted by Congress in August. The move reinforced concerns among both Democrats and Republicans that the Trump White House is mismanaging the State Department and undercutting the role of U.S. diplomacy. The elimination of the sanctions coordinator appears to be part of the larger reorganization debacle underway at the State Department, said Sean Bartlett, spokesman for Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A State Department spokesperson told Foreign Policy they notified Congress last month the office would be shutting down and moving to the Policy Planning Office. No movement of funds or personnel has taken place, the spokesperson added. Both Cardin and Senator Bob Corker, maverick that he is, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, had blasted the administration over its failure to implement new sanctions. After blowing past the October 1st deadline, the State Department finally issued belated guidance for the measures, identifying entities and officials linked to Russia's defense and intelligence sectors. How wonderful. Okay, so they're sort of kind of underway, but in the meantime, eliminating anybody whose job it is to make sure that sanctions are imposed and imposed effectively. Gee whiz, no one could have predicted that. All right, well, it is time for us to wrap up for the day. Another interesting discussion and much more to add. We'll prepare something for you for Monday over the weekend. Lots to explore. As I said, there's no way to cover it all, and I'm sure it'll all be rendered moot pretty soon when the President anger tweets us into the next constitutional crisis. At any rate, there are some folks on Netroots Radio, believe it or not, who are dedicated to bringing you an organized and competent show, and they come next. The after show and its Friday episode are up next right here on Netroots Radio. Keep it here all day. I recommend it. Here's what they've got to tease you with now. A 56-year-old Brea, California resident drove his car into a group of protesters outside Republican Ed Royce's office in the Orange County town. The media is reluctant to cover neo-Nazi violence, like maybe this might turn out to be a copycat crime of Charlottesville. And Trump purposely missed the Russia sanctions deadline. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, what do you know? He's disbanded the office that oversees Russia sanctions. I feel like we heard that somewhere before. There's much, much more, and I can try and cram some of that in over some exciting exit music after this announcement.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
The after show guys like me, they've got an eye for the esoteric. Here's the stuff they've got collected for the last half of the show. Americans are spending 6 times more on Halloween candy and costumes than it spends to feed the poor. And 2 American women are rescued 900 miles southeast of Japan after drifting for 5 months at sea. Stay tuned.